another episode of Employer Exchange. My name is Dan Seiden. I'm here with my partner, Tonter Landy. And today we have a special guest, Elwyn Brewster Quirk of the law offices of EB Quirk. Elwyn, welcome, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, both of you.
I'm looking forward to our conversation.
The goal of our podcast today is to kind of talk about business and workplaces and what you have done to develop a workplace for your employees, and maybe along the way, if you've had any incidents of horror stories and we can dive into that. So tell us a little about you and your business.
Being an employer is a difficult thing, and being an employer as a law firm is even more interesting. So I'm an attorney and I do have a law practice. I have had my practice now for 14 years, almost 15 years. And I presently do have 2 employees, which took a long time for me to make that change from going as a solo practitioner with no one to be able to hire someone to then take responsibilities and be in charge, which was really very hard for me at the beginning, but was something that was necessary. So one employee that I have, she was first hired in 2017, and she's been with me since. I have tried for a few other individuals as a second employee. So I do have someone who's been with me now a year and a half. Her situation is interesting because she's been out the last 2 months due to an injury. So half my practice relates to real estate closings. And as you guys may very well know, when it is you're dealing with real estate, there is significant money that you have to handle, checks, huge responsibility. The other half of my practice revolves around probate related matters. And specifically, I concentrate mostly on conservatorships as well as decedent estates. Conservatorships are pretty interesting because you are managing people's money as well as making medical decisions for them. It gets interesting because you also have to have accounts for each of these individuals when it is you're paying bills. It's a huge fiduciary responsibility, which again, does dictate, who it is you have come into your office to manage these accounts.
And does 99% of all of our real estate transactions, and he has a dedicated person who helps him, a real estate paralegal who is able to handle most of the paperwork. We also do the employment stuff and some personal injury. So we can definitely relate to that, having the right person in the position. I also still do some probate work. And I think that's where we may have met many, many years ago, or maybe through the Bar Association. I know where you're coming from with like the reporting and the accounting and the inventories and things like that.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And it is essential because, again, it's high fiduciary role.
How did you get to 2 employees? What is your journey as an employer?
Yeah, so originally I had a number of interns because, I was scared as an attorney with that knowledge that you have the ultimate responsibility no matter what anybody else may do, scared me huge. So I did have a couple interns that did not work out. I had one intern that came in and she tried really hard, but she had high anxiety levels. So much so that when we had a closing and we had to send off payoffs, there were 2 different companies that we had to send these payoffs to. And she swapped the checks, one going to Bank of America, the other one going to a local bank. And that was an absolute nightmare because then obviously the payoff checks did not get there in time following the closing. So interest accumulated. One of those banks, which is a national bank, could care less. And the other one at least worked with us, no problem. You had no other choice but to find someone. So I actually reached out to Branford Hall. I don't believe that they have a paralegal program any longer, but I reached out to their Southington location as that was closest to where I'm located in Meriden. I asked them, listen, I'm looking for a paralegal. I need somebody high caliber. I also wanted somebody who spoke Spanish because that was an area, especially for Meriden, that I felt was very important to be able to diversify my clientele. So they did send me the name of one individual. She seemed very good. Had high accolades. I did meet with her. That was in 2016. And this was already 6 years having the practice. So as I said, it took me a long time. So she came in, and my policy that I decided to those failed intern attempts, right? And my nervousness was that I would have someone work for me for 6 months, right? As an independent contractor before being hired. That was what I felt was good to be able to determine whether or not they would be effective. I know some places do 3 months. I said 6 months because I did not want to have to commit to something and then have to retract. She did work for me as an independent contractor for 6 months, which I felt was safe. But if it didn't work out for either one of us, and that's the way how I presented it. It's not just about me being happy with you, but you being happy with me, that we could both mutually part without any issue. And so she did work for the 6 months, and then she was hired after that time period. And she is the employee that has been with me since.
Wow.
So from 2017 to now. And she is actually now my real estate paralegal.
Okay.
And I trust her very much. And she was huge at the time when it is that I hired her, because it was a time when it is I really needed someone else to be in the office.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I was going to ask, how you took the experiences that you had with your interns into account when you started the actual hiring process. I think that's fascinating that you went the independent contractor route. Distinct difference between independent contractors and employees.
There's a feeling out period, and they can make a decision, or you can make a decision it's not the right fit, and it's a much easier separation. You don't have to incur the additional expense for payroll and other things that come along with having educated employees working in the business. On the flip side, there's the aspect of control and whether the person is really an employee. If they came in and they were wearing law office of EB Quirk polo shirt, and they're using your computer, and they had to come in from 9 to 5 every day, and they had to follow the way you did things, and you really watched them like a hawk, potentially there could be an issue of whether or not this person is an employee. And so maybe Department of Labor could get involved. And we've had many of those cases on both ways, for employees as well as employers. If you have a true independent contractor and they're able to work, maybe they're able to work for other companies. They're not just dedicated to you. They're not driving your company van or car all over the place. And I know you don't do that. I'm talking about contractors. That's a big issue where you see that. They'll hire independent contractors, and they have to arrive on the job in their uniform and in the company vehicle. Are they using your tools, computers, etc.? There's a lot of news going on in terms of guidance, Department of Labor, independent contractors, and the rule concerning control.
Making the transition from independent contractor. What's that process like for you?
I just want to go back for a second on the whole concept of control, because that was perhaps the hardest part of dealing with the whole independent contractor situation. The preference actually was for her to come into the office and to be there so that she could actually learn and understand, because one of the things about this particular individual is that this was a second occupation, a second profession for her. So she had never had experience of being a paralegal before. So it provided me the opportunity to be able to guide and teach her. And she was very willing to come into the office without me having to say, hey, you have to come in here. That it worked out so nicely for me at that point in time. But the transition then from being an independent contractor employee was huge, because I'm doing it all myself. And so the whole concept of then registering your business so that you can set up the employee taxes was daunting. But I was like, I have to do this. W-2 forms and, the whole 9 yards, figuring out, okay, how do I do payroll? Can QuickBooks set me up with this? How can I do this? I mean, it took more hours. It was like a job in of itself. And I had nobody. It was a learning process. And thankfully, I guess, as lawyers, we are always put in a situation where we have to teach ourselves things. So that's what it is I ended up doing. It took a while, but we got there in terms of ensuring that she was legit. And I think the most important thing that one can do as an employer, especially when it is you're hiring an employee for the first time, is before you know that employee is going to start as an actual employee, start looking into what it is you need to do. I didn't wait till the 6 months. Right. Because I knew, all right, we're coming up in 5 months. What do I need to do for the state? And so that would be the biggest recommendation so that you could actually feel like you're ready and prepared.
That's a really good point. Do you have a written agreement? And that kind of dictates the relationship going forward. And that is something that Dan and I counsel employer clients on, making sure that it's in there, that it's clear that we're not controlling this person, like you said. And then moving forward, you have a full-time employee getting into vacation time and benefits, holidays, and hiring another employee. And maybe you get into an employee handbook or have written policies. How about the decision to add a team member to your law firm?
Much easier. I did have a written independent contractor agreement that was in place that indicated, the hours and the same control type language that they can do whatever they want to do, pay rates, etc., and that, 6 months. And then I did develop an employee manual because my employees are hourly, they're not salary. And I prefer it that way so that I don't have to feel like, okay, you're working and I have to pay you, but what exactly are you doing? So, keep it at an hourly rate. And the employee manual basically set out the expectations for the firm. It outlined absences, vacation time, what was the policy. And there have been changes along the way that when I do make changes, I would print out a copy of it, have them sign. And that was something, even though it's not a contract per se, and still a manual, that they would still agree to the changes and so forth. We've added vacation days or, federal holidays that weren't necessarily included. But adding a second employee was much easier because then the framework was there. And I think, this leads into when it is I was ready to hire the second employee, despite the fact that I was so adamant about how it is I should do things for the first employee. I did not follow those same things for the second employee. That is where it is that the error occurred on my part. But wow, this went easy. And then you realize, oh my gosh, there's a reason why it went easy, right? And you should follow your rules that you had in place because it's there for a reason.
Part of what we like to do here is talk about stories. And I mean, we don't need names or anything like that. Just that what happened and, how did you handle it? And we can dive into that a little bit.
The name of the employee would be employee number 2. And the reason for employee number 2 was because employee number 1 basically was helping me out with all the little practice areas, right, that fall within the real estate, whether it be eviction type stuff that then comes out, the probate type stuff. But it was necessary for me to kind of focus what employee number 1 was doing. So employee number 1 basically was going to control the real estate because that's where she seemed to have done the best and enjoyed more of that. I then took on the probate, but I needed some assistance to be able to do that. And then the time when I was looking for employee number 2 was during COVID time, which, for you guys having done closings, that was booming. 2020 was off the charts and I could not keep up with the closing. So I needed somebody to help with the probate and also pitch in to help with closing stuff. I sent out through Indeed to look for an employee, a second employee, and, came across this resume that looked really awesome. Individual had higher education, so it was not just about a paralegal certificate, but had finished college, was actually working on master's degree. Some of her background had to do with investigation, which I thought was awesome, because I felt that those were transferable skills, especially for the probate, where it is that you might take on a client that's in a nursing home and you've got no information about this individual. And so you've got to do some research to try to figure out, okay, where are their bank accounts? Where's this? Where's that? And then she did have some paralegal experience, and part of that experience, at least that was referenced in her resume, had to do with closing. So I thought, okay, this is perfect. I've got somebody who has transferable skills and somebody who has done closings. Did our interview via Zoom, and, it seemed really well. I was a little concerned about a couple of things that, she had short stints of working at certain places that I asked about. The answer was pretty much, well, I had to stay home to take care of my parents. That might work well for probate, especially for the conservator cases where it is, you've got to do those things. So I thought, okay, this is awesome. So I took her in as independent contractor.
Independent contractor number 2 starts, and she's handling primarily what?
Probate related matters. That was the focus, but also simultaneously to the side, introducing her to doing those real estate closings. Mistake number 1 that I made was that I did not follow through with contacting employers, prior employers. For your audience, when you get a resume, it might look awesome, but you still should go ahead and contact prior employers just to make sure that you're getting exactly what's there on the paper. Mistake number 2 was that I was so desperate now to get that help, especially during that time frame, that I went against my own rules and regulations, and I only had her as an independent contractor for 3 months, not the 6 that I typically would do. Because in my opinion, quite frankly, you have a better chance of understanding truly what an employee is going to be like for a longer period. Stamina is huge, right? So, if it is, you could do it longer, that's obviously better. But I decided after 3 months to then hire her as an employee. That was mistake number 2. Mistake number 3 was that unlike my first employee, even as an independent contractor, whereby I would get the criminal record report, I actually hired her before receiving the criminal record report.
Gears are turning in our heads right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I take it that after this 3-month period and her official hiring as an employee took a turn differently from what your expectations were. What were some of the issues that you started to see?
Without question. A week after she was hired, I did get that criminal record report, and there was 2 instances of DUI that was on there. But, I get it that life presents some challenges. And, I was willing to put that to the side and had discussed that with her. I said, listen, this is what came through. I've hired you. This was some time ago. It was not very recent. So I thought, all right, maybe since this is more than 2 years ago for the most recent one, I'll take the chance and we'll still proceed. And of course, it's scary because you've already now hired this individual as an employee. So like the responsibility now is even more than if they were just an independent contractor that you can say goodbye. Thank you very much. It was great working with you. So we continued on, and she was appreciative of that. Because she was still working on her master's degree, we structured that it was not going to be full-time. It was going to be part-time, which actually worked out really well for me so that I could transition to paying truly a second salary. And so, we did 20 to 25 hours kind of approximately, based upon what she had going on for school. So after the 3 months period, which was okay, she would sometimes show up late for when it is that we agreed that she would be there in the office. Sometimes she would have to leave earlier than what was planned. It just became a little sporadic after a while. And there was a period of time whereby she was moving. She had indicated that she was having some issues. She was also a singer in a band. There were times that I would pass by in the office and she'll be preparing for band music as opposed to working on work. And that's when it is the things I think, I had to have a talk with her to say, listen, when you're here to do work for the firm, right? If it is that you need to be able to work on stuff for your band, you do that on another time, but not on my time. By the end of that year, it got bad. She wouldn't show up to work some days. There was a period of time that she had moved. I thought maybe it was some complication with moving. And by December of that year, there were days continuously that she would not be in the office. And I would call and be like, what's going on? It actually was extremely stressful for me, not knowing if she was going to be there than if it is that she just wasn't there, period. At least I know, okay, I can mentally prepare my day knowing that she's not going to be there. But, it just was a lot of absences. And then
sorry, I was going to say, and those, as this is starting, were you documenting this? Did you have any policies about attendance at work, or you're starting to utilize or refer back to her as you're starting to see some issues unfold?
When it started happening, it was more verbal, because obviously this is now the first time that I've had to deal with something like that. So I did not necessarily have policies in place. And how do you then give written notification? So much of it probably was verbal, and then text messages that I would get as to, I'm sorry, I can't come in today. And, I'm thinking maybe the stress of school is what's, driving the situation. And then, I just kind of had enough. And funny enough, I then received a phone call from her mother. And her mother had indicated that she was hospitalized And I found out a whole bunch of things that I had not known before. So essentially what was happening was that, she got back into the whole band thing. That's sometimes never a good atmosphere. There was drinking and drugs, and she was finding herself in situations with people that was not safe. And the mother had indicated that she was hospitalized. She thanked me for giving her daughter an opportunity to work. She then gave me further information about several firms that she had applied to and worked for that were short stints that I didn't know about because it wasn't on her resume. I had no idea that there were several firms that she had done work for short periods of time. And I found out that the whole concept of her moving had to do with the fact that she was becoming a little violent at home. I'm thinking, okay, she's home taking care of the parents, and that's why she had left like the last job that she had, which was the impression that she gave me, and that was not the case. I felt it necessary to step up the game and go from the text message thing, because I had sent her a text message. I need to know from you by Friday of this date whether or not you're going to be able to follow through with what it is our agreement is for you as an employee, X amount of days, X amount of hours in the office, etc. I would get like just rambling text messages back from her. I'm so sorry, I'm trying. So I did take the approach of doing a written letter to her indicating the requirements. This is what I've asked. I didn't hear back from you by that Friday deadline date. I'm giving you a new deadline date now. If I don't hear from you, I'm going to assume that this relationship has ended. I kind of had to think outside the box and try to put language in there that was clear, not leaving it up in the air as a please get back to me kind of thing. But if I don't hear from you, this is what it is I'm going to assume.
I have a few follow-up points. The first is, when you hired her, was that in a remote setting?
At the time of her hire, she was in the office. We were back in the office at that point in time. The interview occurred remotely,
Okay.
but even when she came in as an independent contractor, she was mostly in the office.
It's really important for employers to document, even if it's a verbal, to give something in a personnel file, a piece of paper, a memo. Today I talked to John Smith, and have that in a file. And I would highly recommend for employers, small business owners, just take a look at the Connecticut Personnel Files Act. It's really important, and it's all about creating a record in these situations. What impact did she have on your rock star full-time employee?
Stressful, because again, we did not know if it is that she was going to be coming into the office. So things that you would expect this individual to be doing, they're not there. You don't know what accommodations you need to make to change with your schedule. So if it's a file that she may have been working on exclusively, that's a real estate, now between the two of us, we've got to pick it up. And I tried as best as I could to take that burden, which was huge stress upon me. I tried as best as possible not for it to have impact to the other employee, but it just affects the office, period.
Morale
right?
kind of goes down.
Exactly.
Did you have to do anything specifically to kind of bring the morale back up with that employee, the employee number one?
No, I think she understood kind of what was happening. I think she felt really bad about the situation. We just took it day by day, because that's really sometimes all you can do. Even though I may not necessarily have had a memo, I had text messages that I would then try to do snapshots, because, these days even in court, you can submit text messages. It's considered a written statement. Right. I did do snapshots of the text chain and printed those so that it would be part of the file. Right? I have those references, but it was hard. It was very hard.
I think that was great, the way you worded that letter. I'm giving you this opportunity to inform me of what's going on. And if I don't hear from you by this date, I will assume you don't want to work here anymore, essentially. That is important for unemployment purposes too.
That is correct. That was actually my thought.
Yeah. And you're entitled to unemployment if you're let go for performance related issues. A person is disqualified if it's willful misconduct or they've abandoned, resigned from their work. That puts an employer in a really sticky situation where the person is maybe having some difficulties and is not coming back or not responsive. Do I continue to employ this person, or do I let the person go? If I let the person go, then they may be entitled to benefits. This had nothing to do with willful misconduct. I was just having a hard time. I needed a couple more days and she didn't want to give it to me, and then she fired me. So the way you worded it was great. you can then present that to the Department of Labor during an unemployment process and say, this was willful misconduct. They actually ignored me. I'm trying to get her back to work. Or it's resignation, essentially. I gave her this date. She didn't respond. You should deem this to be a resignation and therefore ineligible for unemployment.
Yeah, I had a follow-up I was going to ask before. I think it's something that we kind of glossed over without actually getting into it. But I think between what Tony was talking about and then Owen, what you were talking about, the answer's kind of there. But number two, and I guess employee number one, they're both what we know as at-will employees, correct?
That is correct. They are at-will employees.
So arguably, if you wanted, you could have terminated employee number two at any time.
Focus fair was exactly what Tony talked about in terms of the potentiality of she succeeding with an unemployment claim, which I absolutely was going to be upset about. So
compassion, right? Like not being quick to the trigger to say, all right, you're terminated, your employment is terminated, but saying, hey, I understand that you're going through something, let's talk about it. I need to hear from you. I think that's a great step in terms of creating a better workplace.
What I was getting into from creating a workplace, but also for creating a place that's protecting you as the employer in your business. Scenario here where an employee is hospitalized, some medical condition that is leading to that you need to take into consideration before you jump the gun. All of a sudden you do that, you're possibly exposing yourself to liability. Somebody calling an employment lawyer and saying, hey, I was out, my employer knew that I had this medical condition, communication, next thing I knew I was fired. And taking the steps that you took, I think that the compassion is right there. And I think obviously from the perspective of protecting yourself with unemployment, protecting yourself from potential claims, it's too easy to jump the gun. I think too many employers do it. Take a step back, think about the situation, think your employee is going through, and think business. All these things have to be considered.
I was lucky as well too, because in the midst of all of this going on, I had a marshal show up because she had a warrant for her arrest. No longer was the whole DUI situation before an issue. Now there's a warrant for your arrest. That kind of made it, I was lucky, I guess, because that was an additional reason why with these things, it makes it difficult for you to be an employed person at this office when we've got such high fiduciary responsibilities. Coupled with the information that her mother then gave me, I thought, wow, I really have to do something.
Ultimately, the termination, was there anything that came of it? Were there any issues post? How did that go?
No issues that came from it. I did send a subsequent letter, wishing her well. And, it's funny because her business cards had just come in that I had ordered. And, just to add, I guess, a little bit more of the compassion thing, I included one of the business cards to her and I said, listen, I recognize you're going through a lot right now, but this could be what you could achieve in the future in terms of your paralegal role, should you basically, get better. It was just my way of just trying to remind her that she is capable of much more than what was happening at that point in time.
Really great. The independent contractors, we talked about that. We also talked about documentation, creating a record, personnel file, termination, and unemployment. I see you wearing a Boston College shirt. Can we give anyone a shout out at BC?
Yes, it's for my daughter, Gabriella. She has been admitted to BC, and today, May 1st, it's acceptance day. So she's
congratulations.
accepted.
Awesome. Share some information if people want to reach out to you. What's the best way to contact you? Where's your office located?
Information could be obtained on the website, www.ebquirklaw.com. That's E as in egg, B as in boy, QUIRK law.com. My email address is also the same, ebquirk@ebquirklaw.com. My office number is 203-440-0359. I am in Meriden, Connecticut.
Probate real estate. Dan and I had a really great time talking to you. We've known you for a while, and we really appreciate you being a guest on our show. At this time, let's give the tip of the cap. 3, 2, 1.
My pleasure.